Sorry, we're running a little late. How is everybody this morning? Good. Okay, maybe people could just turn your cameras on for a quick, like, good morning. Hi, James. I know. It's like a little wave hi, and we can all see each other. We can feel like we're in the room together.
It's the new hug.
I know.
Hey, Dina, before you got on, I mentioned that Michael and I have a calendar conflict, and so the Midtown team agreed that we'll do it at the end of the session versus the beginning of the session.
I'm sorry, we're gonna do what?
The public engagement piece, sorry.
At what time?
Well, the day ends at 12:30, I believe.
Yeah.
So we'll be back around 11:20, 11:30.
Okay. Great. Okay, great.
And I
Okay.
know that Phil wanted to do next steps, so
Right.
I'll decide how the agenda unfolds.
So did you get started on that, Daniel, or should we do that
Nope.
now? Okay, great. Okay, well then I think, Philip, we had posed to you and you had said you have a lot of topics that you want to be sure that we cover. And so we want to like open up, we had an agenda item, but we want to really give you the floor to frame the issues that you want to be sure that we address. And then also you had asked that we include the rest of your team. So I don't know if you're wanting us to do sort of a recap of what has been discussed over the last few days, or kind of where do you want to go this morning?
Well, Dina,
I'm deferring to you, but really Bill and James.
I'll be the spokesman. Just
thank you.
And I'm happy for my team to interrupt me and to take different opinions. But I think what would be most helpful, since we've got a pretty wide group, is for us to spend the first 30 minutes, hour, recapping what has gone on the last 2 days.
Okay.
Because I think that's really an important come together point. And then from there, I think we can talk about next steps. But I think the first thing would be helpful. Not everybody was able to join different sessions. Not everybody was invited to different sessions. You guys have been the glue that's kept this together. So I thought what this session was going to be was to try to do the big recap so that we all leave the last day with at least a common understanding of what was discussed and what points we've come to agreement on. Is that, I'm speaking for all the team Midtown. I think we're all in agreement, but anybody overrule me if you would like.
Okay, so we've been working on what are our points of agreement, what are our gaps in knowledge, and where are we still in disagreement or I would say gaps in knowledge also would include further exploration, right?
Right.
And then what are sort of some of the existing sticking points, right? Okay, so that is for the first hour. So that would take us from 9 to 10. And then we did have the ENA on the agenda. So from 10:15, let's say to 11:30, we would talk about the ENA. Is that right?
Okay.
Okay, and then 11:30 to 12:30, we'll talk about the community engagement.
Okay. Again, I'm speaking on behalf of our team. If anybody has different opinions, but I think that's a logical order.
Great. Okay. Great. Great. James and Philip and Andrew and other reps of the team who've been involved. Okay, well, day one. Who wants to, does someone want to like lead us off on, I mean, I think day one, the intent of day one was really to talk about big picture and, but also to really start to put information on the table. So in the morning of day one, the development team shared information. And then, but also then the city began to share information on the status of things like the land swap and the infrastructure. And we talked about access and sort of the general framework. We talked about building condition. One of the key things that came out of the morning discussion is that the development team has an assessment of building condition and the city has an assessment of building condition. Each group has some different information or thought process, and we agreed that one thing that would be very helpful as an immediate next step would be to combine those two spreadsheets. So
Hey,
James.
Tina, I have a comment because I spoke with Sam about it,
Mhm.
and his rehab reuse list is exactly like theirs.
Just to
He
let
had
you know, I know you're.
like not so sure that are more about the dorms and stuff like that because they are being reused right now. But I don't think that that would take 15 minutes, I think, to kind
No,
of.
I'm just saying that that was a point of agreement. I'm not saying we're gonna go over that. So anyway, so that, I think that was the big point of, a big point of agreement out of the morning session on Monday. Others want to add about points of agreement or points of,
And
things that were left
Dina, let me put an exclamation point on that because I do think, we have a 95% overlap of what buildings need to be torn down.
Mhm,
But let me put this in a business context.
mhm.
That's disappointing to us. It's disappointing to the city. It's disappointing to everybody. We had thought there was commercial value to some of those buildings. And I think by agreeing that we have to tear down at some point, all but 4 or 5 buildings says that there's really no commercial value to the buildings on the campus today.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's the logical conclusion, but I just want to drive that home.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
So not only do we have consensus on what buildings need to be torn down, but the economic implications to what it means for us to create value for Midtown. For when I mean us, all of us.
So the point is that when you went into this assessment, you were intending to find interim value that would generate some short-term cash flow.
Yeah,
Right, that would be a phase 1 point, a 0.5 or whatever, right? Not a
Right.
phase 1, but a 0.5 that would
And-
be a revenue generating.
in the big picture, we thought that might be $10 million. And again, when you look at on a per square foot basis, that's a very low basis, and thus the upside, you might could double your position just by activating those. But yeah. And then combined with, just the fact that the market was there in terms of hands up, I'll take it. I probably have money to pour into it and rehab it, or I'll commit to a long-term scenario to quite a few more question marks or a big timeout from potential users. So yeah, just existing building stock.
Okay. That's a really important point and very helpful to have it really crystallized like that. Right. I think that's part of what might be missing from some of this dialogue is that we haven't fully crystallized the implication of these conclusions. So that's a very helpful one.
And I think what we're all trying to do is to help Rich be able to present to the city council, what they need to know so they can start making good decisions.
Right.
So I think that's a consensus. Generally, we're all on the same page about what buildings to tear down, which ones to keep, and what that means for value implications.
Great.
Good.
Great. So that's point number 1. The other thing that we discussed at great length was the status of the infrastructure. Right? Should we switch to infrastructure?
Yes, Dina, we'd like for you to kind of make that a very succinct point. How would you suggest you do that?
Well, I think that we began to talk system by system, right? So water, wastewater, stormwater, electricity, gas, and fiber, right? So we broke it out that way. So if we go system by system, and I think this, okay, I'm gonna write this down. So storm, let's see, gas, electricity, fiber. So we talked about which of these the city owns and operates as a utility. So water and wastewater, the city operates as a utility. So I'll just, there was a whole issue around metering individual buildings and moving towards individual buildings being able to pay their own cost, which will be obviously an important part of future development. And that most of the buildings on the campus have now been remetered to have their own water meters, right? We're Regina and Shannon, I don't see in my first screen, but I think that's
correct, Dina.
okay, something we learned, right? And that the water system has been upgraded. It's in pretty current condition. The wastewater is a little more iffy, but I can't remember what the student population was for the campus, but it's been handling a lot of load already because there was a residential population on the campus. So as we later discussed what a first phase would look like, a potential development that could accommodate somewhere up to 400 units, everybody agreed that that the current water and wastewater infrastructure system could handle that load without a significant impact. The only caveat to that is that there is a requirement that new development would acquire water rights, and there is a cost to that. However, well, and I might be jumping ahead because some of this discussion came out as part of the using phase one as a way to sort of test some of the issues. So maybe I'll just stick with infrastructure condition right now. And then when we come back to the phase one, we can talk a little bit about what we learned. The stormwater system needs a lot of work, I think. And we did learn some issues about water, what is it, retention versus, what's the other word for it? I can't remember. It's how much you can retain and capture on site versus how much you can hold, but then you have to release off site, right?
Detention.
That's detention, Dina.
Detention,
Yeah.
thank you. Sorry, I'm a little tired, so my vocabulary isn't fully there. Okay, so that's the issue with stormwater. The gas system is an issue. It's old and very funky. The city owns the gas lines, but the whole thing needs to be ripped up and redone, right?
And Dina, I think the other thing that we all put on the table is, depending on our sustainability targets, it may just need to be done away with.
The gas, yes.
Yeah, which would then translate into some additional impact on buildings that currently use gas to heat the building.
Exactly. The gas is key to the heating and cooling of the buildings on campus, and it's a central system. This is the difference between having a campus and a series of individual buildings, is that they're, so as you start to, if you were to redo the system or eliminate gas altogether as a source of, trying to go to a more renewable or sustainable model, that really impacts the implications for the HVAC for the buildings that would remain, which are really 3 buildings, as I understand it. It's Fogelson Library. We didn't talk about this when we talked about buildings, but let's just say it's Fogelson Library, the Garson Theater, and then the Arts Center are the 3 keepers, and obviously the Garson Studios. and
I think
Benvenutus Hall,
would add Beneldas Hall.
Benaldus Hall.
Yeah.
Right. So those are the keeper buildings. I'm sorry, we didn't say those earlier, but that is tied, as James just pointed out, that's tied to the gas issue because all of those buildings are on a central heating and cooling, right? Am I getting this right, Sam? Okay, good. I see you nodding your head. Good. There is electricity to this site now. The question is it redundant and where does it come from? But I think that gas and electricity are the two utilities that are owned by utilities that are not the city, right? And so the upgrading of those two utilities could be worked with the utilities being responsible for executing that over time.
Tina,
Sam, you want to?
Yeah, I think Sam's going to tell us that the city actually owns gas.
They own the gas pipeline, but they don't provide the gas. And to replace the gas, then that responsibility would go to the gas.
Yeah, sorry.
That's my
I
point.
was, Phil and I were thinking the same way, but I understand what you're saying. We own both the electric grid and the gas grid, but we do not produce the resource.
Right.
Or provide.
So if the grid is replaced, then the city would no longer want to own the grid. The grid would then go into the ownership of the utility, potentially.
I think that would be the master developer's preference, and I'm pretty confident that's Sam's preference as well. How am I doing, Sam?
I think that's a good point of agreement.
I'm trying to think back. Was there a conversation about some sort of like district energy and would this affect that conversation?
We did have a discussion about district energy in the afternoon of the first session. So, you know, a spoiler alert, we agreed that there probably is insufficient demand on the campus to support district energy and that it's like just too complicated a structure, and that using green building and green site design and going towards a system that would use renewables through the sort of the bigger infrastructure system, that the campus, that the Midtown area or district could really become very sustainable, but district energy is not a necessary requirement in order to get there. It's too complicated and not necessarily viable.
It was the operation and maintenance that really sort of was the wall that we came up against.
Right, but I think that the operation and maintenance, we just didn't think there was sufficient demand even to justify the investment. And then it would be a third-party operator. It just adds another layer of ongoing governance and complexity that we think perhaps is unnecessary. So that's another point of agreement.
We completely agree.
See, we got to some good places here. Okay, and we can sort of come back to that because we discussed these things in more detail in the afternoon session. On the fiber, the city owns the fiber infrastructure and has the capacity to add, I believe, as much capacity as a user would need. But it has to be in the next step to upgrading the fiber would have to be in response to a specific user. That's my understanding. Sean, is that correct?
Yeah, I'd express it a little differently. We have the on-site distribution network is owned by the city, and it's modern. So the DMARC is actually in the center of the project, and it's touched right now by Comcast and by CenturyLink. And Plateau is on the edge of the campus and could be brought in. And the idea of city building out to the campus would be the offsite infrastructure the city's capable of building to its own network for about $400,000 in offsite costs. Hope that's clear.
Okay, so it's there, it's, the potential is there, it's a near-term opportunity
For
for
city,
fiber, yeah, for the
Well-
city,
it's readily available today from CenturyLink and Comcast.
right? Okay.
Dina, can I
Anything-
add one thing about
Yes.
utilities?
Yeah.
We had a discussion about joint use trenching.
Yes,
and,
that was in the afternoon, we did talk about.
Yeah, and setting up infrastructure so that we could more easily accommodate improvements to the system in the future,
Right.
even if phase one decisions weren't made.
Right. Well, let's come back to that. I think what we're trying to do is just sort of put on the table the status of everything. And then we'll pivot to the afternoon session. I think another thing that we did talk about in the morning was the access points. And we'll come back to that in the afternoon because we discussed that quite a bit. Once we, some of these things you can talk about in the abstract. But I think that one of the key points that James made was that access is really essential to creating value. And I don't want to skip that point. I think it's really important. We need to acknowledge it. And I would say it's essential. That was a point that really came home again and again.
And Dina, if I can put a business point to that.
Please.
Every one of your responders said we needed more access to the site. It's not just Team Midtown, that was universal. And it was probably universal on the most major issue facing Midtown for value creation. So we want to elevate it to the importance it deserves. From a practical standpoint, access does not get cheaper in the future. It becomes more expensive. And if we go public and we have a great plan for Midtown, the cost of securing that access goes up. We've had limited conversations with some of those access people that control access, and there doesn't seem to be a big willingness to sell at any price. And so we would make the business points twofold. Number one, access, very important to everybody that's looked at this. And two, waiting to try to find it later doesn't make it easier nor cheaper. And number three, if we don't think we can get it, it has implications on the master plan and phasing. So those would be the business takeaways on access. James, Bill, I know we've all spent a lot of time, but would you guys put any other exclamation points on access?
No, I think you hit the big ones. Well, the one that I would add to it is that, given the already expressed concerns over traffic generation, that it would also be helpful in securing entitlements for more intense development programs.
Can I just add that drive is also driven by property acquisition to get those access points. So both with the state and other entities such as the schools.
Okay, so traffic generation issue would be easier to address with a clear path to access points, right? James, is that what you're?
And then again, it makes our entitlement process easier to get through as well.
Right, okay.
And if we make a judgment, it's too expensive and not possible,
Mm-hmm,
the sooner we make that judgment as a group,
mm-hmm,
will dictate
mm-hmm,
so many other things.
right,
Again, as we think about a decision tree, to me, that's the biggest branch. We got to
mm-hmm,
figure out what, are we on that branch or another branch?
mm-hmm.
So again, not to belabor access, but I know that's something that we feel.
No, I think it's and again, I think this is really helping to crystallize why these points are important. And we sort of started to talk about this a little bit yesterday about just having a strategy around access might be helpful, right? So then to Mark's point about the access ties to the land swap, right? And then it ties to the relationships with the adjacent property owners.
Land swap, other acquisitions, and that obviously really affects the phasing. We really can't, it's hard to get out of phase one until some of those other acquisitions are secured.
It's a big branch that has a lot of smaller branches that take off of it.
Okay. So
And I
this,
guess I'm stating the obvious after phase one, and again, it's talk about the studio component that exists and doesn't care much, and they've got all the access and movement they need at the south end. And if it becomes a heavily residential component, phase one on the north end,
mhm,
without any future access, the Las Ramblas, you know, in the interior
mhm,
never
mhm.
densifies or, you know, can be realized in terms of commercial components. Could be a wonderful residential environment, you know, and
Mhm.
pleasant, but yeah.
Okay, well, that's super helpful. I mean, just crystallizing that as a near-term issue that needs a strategy, and for the reasons that you said, that it would help with the entitlements process, it would help with an understanding of future phasing, and it's really essential to an understanding of future phasing and value creation. Right, so entitlements, I'm just writing this down to capture it. Okay, that's super helpful. Anything else that people want to add about that kind of the morning session? We did talk about the land swap with the state. I think the key takeaway, there were some key takeaways from there, but and the city is working on it very closely with the state. But I would say that one of the key takeaways for me was that this is not generating revenue for the city as had initially been understood. Initially, I think that there was going to be some number of millions of dollars that the city was going to get. I can't remember the exact number, but instead it's going to cost the city about $450,000. Is that right, Andrea? Yeah. And Andrea went through a very detailed list of the parcels and what would be exchanged and so forth.
There's I want to just add my usual adage on time. Time is really of the essence on that swap, because if it doesn't happen in January, it goes another 12 months before it can.
Right, okay,
That
so.
is-
Right.
that
And
impacts
Mark, you know,
phasing.
we understand that, and we have been working weekly on this. It's not on the back burner. It really is something that has been a weekly meeting with the state. So we are really trying to facilitate that. And we have another meeting Friday. So
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't mean to
Now
put you on your
we-
heels. That was not my intent. It's mostly just to crystallize that point.
Yes, I think this is an important point, is that the city is working very proactively on this, and to some extent it's out of their control, right? The state they're doing the best, the city is doing the best they can to try to really emphasize this with the state. I think that's also an important point. The city understands that time is of the essence on this and are doing what they can, but they are also to some extent subject to the bureaucratic hurdles of the state. Any other points of agreement, you know, based on the topics that we discussed for the morning session? I think I do want to acknowledge that James did talk about his sledgehammer approach to land value. And we want to acknowledge that we did, that he has discussed that at pretty much every session. And so I don't want to diminish that. I think we should come back to that topic, because I think yesterday afternoon was really where we kind of got a little bit more into that. So I'm going to hold on that, except to say that the development team did present their kind of market findings. But we're also getting to sort of crystallize and distill the business points, Philip, as you're doing, you're kind of summarizing this. And so therefore, this is what this means for us, which is super helpful.
I would add to the sledgehammer approach, if you will, to infrastructure. And Regina nailed it yesterday in terms of establishing rough order of magnitude of infrastructure. There literally is a 30% contingency. It could go this way or that. And that is the very number we have from Stantec, you know, it's around 30 million. And from a initial standpoint, I asked my construction guys, like, oh my gosh, they're carrying 30% contingency. Is that crazy? And they're like, nope, not at this stage of the game, given what we know. But it is quantity takeoffs. It is assumptions relative to connectivity and paving and infrastructure. And yes, at our 100-day assessment, that was one of those massive gaps. It's like, how do you get from here to there? How's it, who funds it? And then again, with this phase one, it's the same similar questions like, well, is it 10 million, you know, to open it up and make it a compelling, attractive neighborhood?
Right.
So sledgehammer, yes, but it really is a qualified consultants approach, you know, so it's good advice.
Okay, so I think we can say that we had the $30 million infrastructure number, and then also we have the table of land values that are appended to the back of the agenda on page, sorry, I'm just scrolling through really quickly, on page 16 of the 18-page agenda, which I hope everybody has. This is Exhibit A from KDC Sienda, and this, they asked us to insert this into the agenda so that everybody had these numbers in front of them. These are important deal points. So I don't want to skip over. I think this is something that we did discuss and we continue to discuss. So just to put, so Bill, thank you. Just to put again, what we put on the table, the $30 million infrastructure number and these land current market values that you all presented were key to what the development team was putting forward.
Dina, the other thing I think we got on the table somewhere between yesterday and the day before was the difference between the gross acreage and the net developed, and that the you know, the designs that were intended to maximize and use the link overlay created a pretty severe, well, between keeper buildings and link design elements, it created a pretty severe netting, you know, more than we would normally expect on just a flat piece of ground.
Okay, well, I think we should talk about the net to gross and the link a little bit more in a minute, because I'm not sure I fully grasp the implications of the link just for the net to gross.
Okay.
So, or gross to net, sorry. So please hold that, and then let's talk about that, because yesterday afternoon is when we really had the kind of extensive discussion about the zoning, and the link in terms of looking at it, like how it would play out on the ground with a phase one, and what are qualified buildings, etc. So we're just on the first session of the morning in terms of all the information that got put out on the table. Anything else stand out from anybody of that morning session? I would say that both days we went from sort of talking about broad concepts to actually seeing how these would play out on the site and kind of what the implications were. So it looks like Stefan just got up and walked away, but in the afternoon session on Monday afternoon, we then began to talk about the actual site itself, and to begin to identify what a framework could look like, and to begin to sort of hone in on those access points. Drew, are you here, and can you kind of step in and summarize what, a little bit about what we talked about? Maybe, I don't know if you want to throw the concept board up from Monday afternoon.
Yeah, I can share that. Give me just a second to pull that up here. All right, everyone's able to see that.
I think we should skip to, yeah, thank you.
So Dina, my recollection from that conversation is that we tried taking everything that you've just discussed into account to start to identify what would be a feasible area to focus on for a phase 1 development. And I think the general course of that conversation was that the Alumni Drive from St. Michael's
So
down.
Drew, wait a minute. I think on Monday afternoon, we talked more generally about the access points and the value of Cerrillo, St. Michael's, Llano, and Siringo.
Yeah.
And we looked at some alternatives for access, 2 access points on Siringo. So we sort of, we wanted to confirm the access to Cerrillos. How important is that? So I think that's more what we talked about on Monday. I want to hold the phase 1 to for a minute. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you. So we talked about, so Drew, do you want to talk us through this, or do others want to talk us through this? Or?
Yeah, I can, and I see that Stefan's back, so Stefan,
okay.
to lead the conversation as well. But
yeah, I can jump in. I'm sorry, okay. I had to step away for a sec. We did, yeah, we had a conversation about access on the afternoon of the first day, and the conclusion from that session was that I think it was recognized that the St. Michael's access in the short term was key, as well as both the existing access off of Siringo and the second access that can be created off of Siringo at the southwest using city-owned property. So there's sort of those 3 points, which sort of rose to kind of one level. And then I think what we understand is that the state land swap will not guarantee a vehicular access from the property to Camino Carlos Rey, but that there is an opportunity to create a strong ped bike connection that would connect up through Franklin Miles Park and provide connectivity out to that system. And then with regards to the 2 additional potential access points, one that could be made across the Thomas property, we understand that that one is really contingent upon the redevelopment of that parcel. And there was a discussion about sort of the degree to which they are serious about redeveloping that parcel, and to what extent it actually could be done in a way that is coordinated with this development or not. And then with regards to the Cerrillos connection, what was discussed was that it's not, I think from the city's standpoint, it's perceived as an important connection, but not in the short term. And there was some discussion was made about establishing a ped bike connection in the short term in lieu of a full vehicular connection, as well as ways that the city could use its zoning and entitlements power to ensure that a connection comes out of a future redevelopment of that property. What was discussed was that it was, I think, recognized that it's sort of an important piece of this, particularly to open up the mixed use potential at the core of the Midtown campus, but that the sort of short-term movement to secure that was not seen by the city as a priority.
Dina, can I make a developer point on that?
Yes, please do.
We have a strong disagreement with the city.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, we think it's an important short-term objective. And if we make the consensus that we can't get it, it impacts everything. And we just need to quickly make that decision. But we're still not clear why the city doesn't think we can go. I mean, is it a cost issue? Is it a legal issue? We really didn't have a conversation, and we're not going to be a good developer to you if we just accept your points without pushing back on what we think is important.
Okay.
This is a point where I think we have a disagreement on importance with the city. And I guess we would like to have more clarity on why that can't be a high priority today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. If I can just chime in for a minute. The city does have, this is Andrea, the city does have the power of eminent domain, and we have explained, that is a process. It could take years, but we do have that ability. And in terms of looking at this map, there is this access point potentially that's on state land that abuts behind Planet Fitness area that could be potential. We don't know, but we really do need some type of master plan to understand, and traffic study to understand where the best point or option is. We have to have some reason to start the eminent domain process. But we do have that as part of our toolbox to move forward. So I just want to throw that out there into the world.
Yeah, and on that point, Andrea,
Can I-
so basically,
go
what
ahead.
I was hearing from the developers, this is Erin from the city attorney's office. I was hearing that the owners are not willing to sell, and then there's the option of eminent domain. Are there any other options that are being considered? What other options might there be?
And then if I could piggyback on Aaron's question, this is Eli. What sort of participation from the city are you looking for, or what do you see as the city's role in securing that access?
Well, I think there are two ways to get access. You buy it or you condemn it. I think sometimes starting in a combination process makes buying it a little bit easier. And so I think we would like to devote more time and energy to understand what those processes are, to see if they're politically and economically feasible. And if they, and listen, we recognize this is an uphill issue. We're not trying to underscope how difficult it is, but we're trying to put on the counterbalance that this is maybe one of the most important value creations we can make for the city's value at Midtown. And we just need to be able to try to balance how much value it provides and how much it's worth the city to go through this process. And again, you're just getting the developer's perspective. We're private sector guys, but we're forced together to operate in this public forum. We know there are political issues, there are legal pressures, but from a business pressure, if you had to acquire a retail property, this may be a good time to acquire it than waiting 2, 3, or 4 years down the road. And it helps inform the planning and the opportunities and the options we all like to see at Midtown. So I don't want to belabor the point, but we just don't want you to think that because it's difficult, we would still like to engage and see what the options might be. And at the end of the day, it may not be an option at all, but we'd like to engage in that. James, Bill, what would you guys add to that?
So one thing, I think we've had the conversation that along the lines of, today we're underwater. If we take just the land values that we would see going into the first round of deals and take that times the net acres available, we're already unable to pay off all the bonds. Any additional cost that's incurred is just really piling on to the subsidy needs. So, you ask what the city's participation would be, it would be either buy it or subsidize it, or help, or would jointly work to go try to find subsidies to get that access. But it's if I was going to try to add value to that property, that would be the first biggest step that I would take would be to try to get frontage, vehicular access, and visibility on the most major street, and get access to the transit and all of the other things that get you kind of get you where you need from a mobility standpoint.
Okay, so you just said a couple of things there, James, and I want to parse it a little bit more to get a clear understanding. So the first thing you said is that the cost to get this access cannot be borne by the development project, at least in today's numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so so I'm just, and again, this is just for the record. Okay, and then the next thing you said is that this is the key value creation move, right?
It's the first, gets you in the game for all of the others.
Right, yeah, but I mean, it's the linchpin essentially.
Yeah.
Without this, nothing else happens. But then you said something about access, frontage and visibility. Okay,
Mhm.
so that's a distinction. So there's a street that punches through. Is that frontage and visibility, or are you talking about actually taking the expanding the development site to incorporate the other parcels? So that's also a really important.
Yeah, good question. So expanding the development site would be the best.
Mm-hmm.
Access is not as good, but better than what we've got. I think that's the way I'd answer it is, it gives you a front door, and think about our front door today, which is, St. Michael's Drive on a very awkward curve behind a bank and a clock tower.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Again, to just parse what your priorities are and how that works is important. That's what we're trying to understand. Okay, and then what could or couldn't work, we're not going to touch right now. We're just trying to get the issues on the table. Okay.
And Dina, I think what we all need,
Mm-hmm.
this is a business decision.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah.
There's going to be a cost to this.
Right.
Economic cost, a legal cost, political cost.
Right.
We need collectively to see what benefit does that give the value of Midtown.
Right.
And we may conclude the cost is too great for the benefit it provides. But we want to go through that exercise with the city to figure out if the cost is worth the benefit we think it creates. We don't know the answer. Our instincts tell us we don't know the cost, so it's really hard to do the balance. But at some point, we're going to have to take James's sledgehammer math and figure out, is the cost worth the value creation? And if it's not, then we have a different type of Midtown to plan. And so it's not good or bad, it's just facts. And we just
Yeah, no, I get that. And but I think that there's in this cost benefit analysis, there are several orders of magnitude on cost and benefit, and that's just what I'm trying to define.
Right.
Okay,
Sorry, Dina.
Well, no, that's it. I'm not trying to get into a critique as much as just.
But I did want to explain how eminent domain works, just so everyone understands. We have to have a compelling reason to go after that land. The compelling reason is that it's incorporated into a plan necessary for that plan to be implemented, and the city has to have the appraised value held in the court account. So anytime you file and you do the whole lis pendens and all of that, you have to have that amount of cash that access is worth, or that piece of property is worth, in the court bank account, held during the duration of the period. So those are some hurdles that we will have to get through. We need a plan that explains this is necessary to implement this. And we would need a reason to put into those court documents. So, you know, I understand saying that that is the starting point, but we actually have to have that type of plan to move forward with it.
Right, but I think what Philip is saying is that if we could do some sledgehammer math to calculate whether or not the cost benefit justifies the cost of that process, which is expensive and time consuming. We all know eminent domain is like the most expensive way to acquire property, right? And I think the development team knows that better than the rest of us sitting here. But I think Philip's point is if there were a sledgehammer math way to do that, to determine early on, that information alone would be very helpful to the development team. I think if I may be so bold, I would say that what is coming out of this discussion is based on your 100-day assessment from the ENA. You're figuring out what the deal points are that would affect whether or not you think you could go on with the project, and really affect how much more you would want to invest in order to really make this happen. Is that fair for you all? And that really the kind of sledgehammer math around some of these things is sort of what you're asking for more information on, and the city's commitment to some of these things. And this one is a biggie.
Right.
Right? Okay, I'm again, just trying to distill the issue, put it on the table, and really understand the implications. I would just, Stefan, I would just ask for one further point of clarification on your diagram, and to a point that I think Eli made earlier is there an opportunity to take the access to Cerrillos through the state property? This is something else we did discuss, and my understanding is that the state property that's just a little bit further to the south on Cerrillos or to the west on Cerrillos actually goes through kind of a courtyard and some other things where running a road through there would disrupt the state's existing operations. But we did look at that, and that might be something else to consider. Is there a second alternative to get access to Cerrillos?
We've Dina, we've considered that, and also running through the school district property out to Camino Carlos Rey, which gets you, it's around the corner, right, but it gets you out to Cerrillos without as much impact on the surrounding neighborhoods.
Right.
And more is better. You know, in a hopeful way, you might get 2 or 3 of those. Again, there's a lot of reasons for it, but those have been part of our thinking. They're not as good from from as far as connecting our existing plan up to the surrounding neighborhood, but they're better than what we have. So
okay.
We're not closing them off. In fact, we'd like to, and again, our approach would be over time, just in fact, we've broken our thinking down into shorter term, medium term, and longer term, depending on the places, depending on the process the owners are required to go through to make a decision. Federal government's a long haul. There is some federal property in this mix of connecting the site back up. School district property has its own process. We've talked with them. It takes time, and you got to march through the process, but it's possible.
Okay.
So that's how we categorized it, and we've focused in on connecting up our spine road as it's the most critical, so it's the one we focused on.
Okay, so that's very helpful to know that you have done this bigger analysis. And it seems like coming back for a more detailed discussion on access would be a possible next step, to really everybody kind of work through jointly what the options and alternatives are, how one might consider the phasing and the cost benefit analysis against you know, the pain versus the gain, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, very frankly, so good. Okay. Well, so I know we are
Can I ask
starting
you a
to,
quick question, Dina? Just
Yeah.
really quick, looking at this
Yeah.
diagram that's on the screen.
yes,
And thinking about things in terms of cost benefit and where we want to put our energies.
yep,
It seems to me that working with, if you had a sort of somewhat friendly landowner at that sort of corner of Yano and St. Mike's, and trying to incorporate that into the site, seems to achieve more in terms of frontage and visibility than going through a protracted process to gain access out to Cerrillos Road through the Smith's parking lot and Hobby Lobby or whatever that is there. I don't know what other people
so
think about.
Eli, I think that is maybe too in the weeds. That's a kind of a new, I think we can talk about that when we talk a little bit about the phase one, but I would suggest that we not get sidetracked into a conversation
Sure.
now about that. And that we really see this access discussion as something that probably, and your question is really appropriate and on point, but perhaps a little bit jumping ahead.
Okay, sure.
Is
It just was sort of a little bit of a bubble that went off in my head, just
Right.
looking at sort of the diagram that's up on
Exactly.
the screen.
Right,
But
exactly.
yeah,
And
we
I
can
think
definitely
that,
put a pin in it.
right, and I think that this is really highlighting the need for, I would say, a detailed discussion around framework, which is what we were hoping to get to through this Charrette process, but I think we're not there yet, but we see that as again, this next step would be to explore all these options, opportunities, pros, cons, how you could think about it in just a very global, gross way, as opposed to doing a lot of detailed quantitative, super fine-grained analysis. We kind of know, we could probably intuit a lot of the answers to these things and make some judgment calls. Stefan, do you have anything else you want to say about this particular? I think we did talk about the second access and potentially third access to Siringo.
Yeah.
And there are, you know, benefits to that. We also talked about if the access point to Cerrillos was made up through the campus that would allow you to cross, I can't remember the name of the street that's just north of there, but it would allow you to cross and connect up to the bikeway, which you can see to the north in that green line. What we did not draw on or really focus on in any great detail was this, what the bike ped master plan for the city shows and so forth, because so that's also a discussion about the relative value of bike ped versus vehicular. There are a lot of topics that are kind of embedded in this access and mobility discussion.
Dina, I just wanted to add, maybe sort of add one point for the record, that we did speak about this at length over the last couple of days, and the thinking about the other RFEI proposals in context. I think it's important to recognize that they were not unanimously, they did not all share this position around how connectivity should be achieved at the site. So I think I want to be careful about sort of characterizing that the Cerrillos connection is something that was universally agreed upon or put forth as essential by the RFEI proposers, because I don't believe that's actually to be true.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can't go any further at this point. We do have some confidentiality issues that we want to respect. So,
Absolutely.
okay, so that I think sums up day one, unless anybody else has anything they want to say. Philip, I don't know if you have any other kind of business perspective you want to add, or if you're ready to switch to day two.
James and Bill, unless you've got something, we're ready to go to day 2.
Day 2, which was also for us planning junkies quite riveting. So for the first morning session, we had a very lengthy discussion about the entitlements process, and Noah gave us a lot of detail about what that process would entail. That ultimately what would be required would be a rezoning, an adoption of the, an amendment to the city's general plan, and an adoption of the master plan. And a master plan, that the link overlay is what really controls the form of the buildings, but the master plan and the general plan amendment, which would set the standards for use. We also agreed that the entitlement process needs to include certainty, particularly around these framework items like access and open space or parks or and the infrastructure, but that use could be handled in a more flexible way. We had a lengthy discussion about the amount of time that would be involved, and starting with this early neighborhood engagement and what that process could look like. I think that Philip and James made it very clear that the entitlements process is expected to take probably 18 months to potentially 2 years. They were asking for I think the point that James was making over and over again is if the master plan could include certain moves to it that would address this kind of future access point, that it would really help facilitate a more productive conversation around traffic concerns. Yeah, again, I don't want to get too into the weeds right this minute, unless we want to talk about the link overlay. And James, you did start to raise some issues around the link overlay, which I'm not sure we fully fleshed out before, but if now is the moment to do that, I think that would be helpful, unless Eli or Noah, you have more you want to add about what we learned from the entitlements process.
I would just, Dina, thank you. Maybe just add a little clarification to your recap.
Okay.
The general plan amendment and rezoning is simply need to happen to allow for the range of uses that have been discussed in our conversations. And then after that is done, the existing link overlay provisions could then be taken advantage of in terms of density bonuses and fee waivers. So the entitlements piece that in the rezoning that we've talked about really doesn't have a tremendous amount of impact on what can or to James' point earlier about the netting, which I'd like to hear him maybe talk a little bit more about. I don't see how any of those assumptions have really changed. It's simply that we need to go through this sort of first entitlements process to then allow the link overlay to kick in and to all of those assumptions about uses and densities to open up to the development team.
Yeah, so James, maybe you could talk to us a little bit more about your gross to net assumptions with respect to the link overlay.
Sure, and it may be broader than just the link. So I thought Eli did a great job explaining how the 3-layer cake. I get sledgehammer math. He gets a 3-layer cake. That's better. A couple things. One, I feel like we've, when we looked at the RFEI and we looked at the consensus around, community and input, it was clear that, to us anyway, that walkable community with complete streets that took advantage of the setbacks and the heights and the densities that were enabled by the link was the best way to try to put a first plan out there that would meet the expectations in the market. And that's really the way, I think that's the way to say it. I don't think there was any single source of you got to do it this way. This was more our collective experience in trying to plan a walkable urban scale community. And, you know, so you got to make sure you don't, you know, if you design your streets and sidewalks and on-street parking and landscape, and, you know, all of those kind of things, you end up with, you know, a pretty big street, but a, you know, pretty generous footprint on your net site. And I think that's really the concept that I was trying to get across, is that the plan that we put forth was trying to be we were trying to be consistent with those principles. And Andrew, I don't know if you have any, if I've said it correctly, but I think that's the, you know, that's the approach we were trying to take. And so to me, the biggest surprise, and for, again, I just want to make sure we're clear on this, was not that we would have to go through an entitlement process, but that we were not starting at the point we believed when we submitted. You know, we felt like there was more consensus in the community. There was more, you know, the starting line was way ahead of where we found ourselves when we got out and talked with people. And I think that's the simplest way to sum up our concerns about entitlements. And that, you know, because of that, you know, our expectations on the timeline have gotten stretched considerably compared to where we thought we were. And, you know, I don't want to whine about it. I probably sounded like that yesterday.
Maybe, but we won't hold that against you. We still love you.
Thank you very much for saying that.
Okay.
Dina, can I ask a clarifying question of Eli and Noah at this point? I understand that the sort of the layer cake strategy was laid out in the E&A, establishing expectations. Given the layer cake strategy, is there the ability to have qualifying projects approved on the site prior to the layer cake being completed, given the presence of the link?
Well, so I think part of the layer cake approach is probably something, how far, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. I mean, I think that there to some level, there will be a layering of sort of underlay, link, and master plan for the site. To the degree to which that top layer can sort of provide flexibility, I think is something we'll have to work through. That's not something that we currently have used master plans for these types of developments for. And so I think that's an opportunity for innovation from the city's perspective. And I think Andrew put it very succinctly when we talked about this, I believe Monday afternoon, of thinking about the master plan, of sort of being fairly rigid on the ground plane and getting increasingly flexible as you move vertically through the site. And that's not something the city has done before, but I think it's a really interesting approach and something that I certainly want to explore with our city team, because I think that that is where we can provide a level of comfort to this KDC team about wrangling all the unpredictability in the market moving forward, especially now with COVID. So that's how I would answer the question about the layer cake. Now, without even thinking about innovation, we need some sort of master plan to which allows the administrative approval process that the link provides to occur. And so we need something there at the master planning level, that third layer of the cake. I guess the question that I would throw out to the team is, how thick do we want that top layer to be? And that's what we need to work through as a team.
Right.
I can't answer that right now,
Right.
but that's the question that I think is in front of all of us around master planning and entitlement.
Right.
Thank you,
Does that
Eli.
make sense to everyone?
I think that's a very good point, because I think that the move from the R5 to the C2 zoning is key. And then that triggers the general plan amendment and opens up the potential of the link. But how much that third piece about the master plan, what the flashpoints might be for the community, and how that plan could be structured so that it meets the kind of the legal requirements in the code, but also so that it could focus on these framework aspects, access, public spaces, and then potentially more certainty around a phase, and then the ground plane, like where we really want mixed use on the ground floor, and then what's above can be flexible. And then also with some kind of general sense of what a development envelope might look like to test infrastructure feasibility, but getting down to the details of parcelization, land use, that you might, that you might think would be in a master plan might not be necessary. So thinking of more creatively and flexibly about how that master plan could work to provide, to unlock the potential of the link, to get the community engaged and provide the community with the certainty they need, but then also create the flexibility that the development community needs. So how to really define that master plan document seems like also an important next step.
And Eli, with the ground plane, you may be able to do that with a combination of performance and prescriptive guidelines, right? So that you've got some very clear parameters that you work to.
Yes, I agree. But I think that master planning document, I think in our conversations, I've been really thinking about the plans in the master planning document. And I think the document part of the master planning document is going to be equally as important in terms of explaining this process and how we sort of govern the site over the coming phases. And so the relationship of the master planning document to the eventual DDA, I think, also becomes extremely important and something we should be thinking about early on in the process as well.
Yeah, another kind of key element of what might be in this sort of streamlined master plan, if you will, is the list of allowable uses without defining where the uses are located on the site. So that's another thing that we did discuss, yesterday, was the fact that the master plan can serve as a way to narrow down the list of permitted uses that are included in the C2 zoning, but would not be allowed on the site. That would include, all the nasty things we don't want, right? So I think this is really helpful because it brought the master plan forward as a potential flashpoint. It identified the intersection between some of the points that were raised earlier around access and viability with certainty, flexibility. So this is helpful. And again, I think it defines kind of a next step.
And Dina, the other point that was raised in this conversation, and I'm not suggesting we go there, was the potential tool to amend the overlay to be able to redress the list of acceptable uses that unlock the benefits, if you like.
We did discuss the potential for, yes, we did discuss that.
Again, not saying that that's a pathway that we want to go down, but there are some maybe.
Thank you. Yeah. But I think, again,
that the list of sort of permitted uses and qualifying project uses defined in the link today, I think align really nicely with the types of uses that have been discussed up to this point in our conversation. So that's an option. I don't foresee needing it at this point, but it certainly, Andrew, is an option that's out there if needed.
Eli, just to clarify, the film studios would not be considered qualifying projects under the link, or they would?
Noah, do you have any input on that? I'm thinking they would in the sort of arts and production spaces, but
okay, great.
That's helpful to clarify because this does tie back to a water rights
Correct. That's
conversation.
exactly right. So this
Yeah.
is another way to understand, again, some of the costs and benefits of the link.
Did I misspeak, Noah, or is that your understanding?
I apologize. I haven't memorized the code yet.
Oh,
but
come on, Noah.
I know. I'm sorry, everybody. Well, I'm just looking here to see where this could fall in. Would there be an educational component to the studios, like they're teaching film students at all?
We could argue that.
Okay, I would say that they could be included in the qualifying project if they have an educational component. Either they partner with organizations that are educational facilities, or that we look at them as, you know, the higher education center or the community college, UNM has an aspect where they have students who come in to learn production type stuff or movie type stuff.
And I think when we
Sally?
looked at it before, we also recognized that it could fall under the category of arts activities,
Okay,
which
great.
I would want to
Great.
confirm that matches up with the other definitions in the code, but I think that's
Okay.
another of the listed
Great.
uses that this.
Okay,
could-
great. I just wanted to put a pin in that because we did discuss that amending the link overlay would be really hard to do. And so one of the questions that we had asked was, are the heights allowed in the C2 zoning with the density bonuses allowed by the link? That we have the very clear incentives in the link. Are those adequate for the needs of the, I mean, this is what we asked yesterday, so that, you know, I don't know, you might want to come back to that, James and Bill and Philip, but yesterday you said, no, we're good with what we get if we do the C2 and link, but you know, that was another kind of point of confirmation.
Hey, Dina, also, I just want to clarify something. There is no density bonuses. There's height bonuses, there's
Height bonus,
incentives.
sorry,
I
yeah,
think we've been using that interchangeably, but really there isn't a density bonus, as you know, land use defines it right in our code. We have height bonuses, fee incentives, and other things along those lines, but
Thank
not
you.
an actual
Yeah.
density bonus.
Okay, you're right. Sometimes we do use those things interchangeably, so that's an important clarification. But I just, again, before we move on to the phase 1 discussion from yesterday afternoon, we're kind of, we're starting to run up against our, no, we're good. Let's see, 10:30 we are. We're running over time, but I think this is a really important conversation. So if everybody's good, I think we'll just keep going. Anyway, so are we good with the conversation around the link, the entitlements process,
I think, Dina, again, to put it in a business context.
Yep.
You've got 8 or 9 developers that have got 20+ year history in Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we've got a lot of accumulated experience there.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we are very grateful for the folks today to push this through, I think to be cautious, the developer group is individuals would probably say this process will take longer and be a little more risky than I think the city perceives it to be. And that's just a natural difference of perspective. But
Right.
I'll at least register because not all of us have been successful getting projects through as fast. In fact, I can tell you every single one of us have not gotten projects approved in the time frame we had hoped or expected. And again, no fault, just that's the reality of our experienced team.
Okay, yeah, I think we all acknowledge that, and we'll say that. But I do think, I mean, I think there's a little bit of chicken and egg problem here because you need the rezoning in order to be able to do the film studio, but you can't really do the rezoning without the master plan. The community, that would be even a worse.
Right.
You know, I'm thinking of not such a great word for that. But I do think that having some conversation about how to structure the master plan to address the certainty and flexibility and also to accelerate as much as possible the entitlements process is probably where we're landing here as a potential next step to explore. So, but I think your point is well taken and noted. Okay. The next session, which maybe we should, I don't know if we want to spend a lot of time on this, was we did have a discussion about funding and financing tools for the state of New Mexico that are available. I think this is, again, a topic area for a lot of further exploration, but in some ways it might be a next step down the in the process, that once the KDCC and the team says, okay, we're ready to move beyond the 100-day pause. Like if we kind of work through these these are sort of interim next steps that might take you to the next level of commitment, if you will. And the funding and financing, you know what the tools are. The city is open to discussing those and whatever. But I don't know if we really need to discuss that at any great length now, or do you want some kind of summary of that? Would that be helpful?
Dina, what I would say if you ask me is that it was encouraging to see that the city staff is aware of and comfortable with a wide variety of funding sources, and that you know, they came to the table well armed, if you will. And so we you know, a lot of those would have been on our wish list, and so it's good to hear that there's a team on the other side of the table that's thinking along the same lines as we are to close that gap.
Great. Good. Yeah, I think, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I think that Santa Fe's team is really outstanding in their creativity and thinking on this. So having, like you all, having worked in a lot of cities, I can say. So, okay, well, let's move on then to yesterday afternoon's discussion. And the purpose of yesterday's afternoon, and you know, Sean sort of asked this question at the beginning of the final wrap-up session, and I'm not sure I had the best answer, but I will say now, in retrospect, why we looked at this phase one in great detail. And the question was, and this sort of speaks to Philip's point earlier, was that in their first kind of phase 0.5, they were hoping to generate, get a cash flow going off of the interim use of buildings. So then we pivot to the next opportunity for near-term value creation. And so the question is, what could our first phase of development look like that has the least amount of cost in terms of infrastructure and other kinds of pieces, and the greatest amount of near-term value creation? So that I would say is why we wanted to look at the phase one, because it then begins to pivot towards an alternative to that kind of the incremental thinking that the KDC team had started with and has found is really not viable at the end of the 100-day exploration. And so now the question is to pivot towards, is there an alternative to that in a phase one that is a real phase one?
Thanks. I agree with that. My point was really very focused on, is this one of the programming constraints? Because I understand exactly what you said, but to the degree that it is, it really should be included as a programming constraint, which we just, day one exercise was meant to identify, because it obviously impact what others have said. It will impact the ultimate layout. So I'm not making a design suggestion whatsoever, but to the degree it's a programming step, an activity, by understanding it as such, I think we'll gain some clarity on how it fits with the general solution.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, is that it's the first step in terms of laying out how the entire framework would.
No, I disagree that it's a first step. It's among all these steps. And I think we've identified from the developer that addressing access conceptually is the first step.
Right, no, I understand that, but again, in terms of moving back and forth between how to start to think about the flow of value, this is the next step. Okay, we have access, we have the
I hear what you're
entitlement.
saying, but I would argue again, as strongly as I could, this is actually a programming activity that we're doing in discussing phase one, and it ought to be identified as such.
Okay.
That's how I think we have to
Okay.
understand it.
Okay, great, okay.
Dina, there was one other really important part, and again, I want to thank Sean for bringing it up, that and I'm not sure whether it was afternoon, morning, sometime, the brownfield discussion, I think is also very important first steps. Finding a way to sort of cut off future liability is incredibly important to creating commercial value.
Right, okay, so I would hold that thought for the ENA discussion coming up, okay?
Okay.
That's because who has responsibility for that and where that fits in things and how that has informed your thinking is a very important point, but I would argue that might be something best addressed through the ENA.
Okay.
Okay. Stefan, do you want to now go back to the concept board and walk through a little bit of what we
talked about yesterday? Yeah,
what we talked about.
Just one moment. Sorry, we need the elevator music while I'm doing this.
I would say that again, the purpose of the phase one was to explore the beginnings of how you could start the site in a way that would look for land uses that could be clustered to create a synergy among the uses and to allow the value of the site to build from the edge to the center over time. So I would just note those as some of the
as well,
here.
Dina, to get our arms around what the earliest infrastructure lift might be.
Correct, yes. Thanks, Andrew. So Stefan.
Sure. What we talked about yesterday was focusing on the parcels that have immediate access from St. Michael's and Alumni Drive, with particular attention to 5 parcels that were shown on the phasing diagram as residential projects, which include some of the existing where some of the existing dormitories are today, this could also include a parcel designated for mixed use 8C in the northwest corner, but it was, northeast corner, but it was acknowledged that the infrastructure costs for that parcel are likely larger and higher than the parcels to the south. So it could be sort of pushed out into a second phase. So all in all, those 5 development parcels are providing about 12 acres of developable land, which the Stantec team confirmed could accommodate upwards of 400 units, considering densities of 35 dwelling units to the acre in a sort of tuck under, or we use the term modified tuck under configurations. These would be residential projects that don't require parking podiums. At the same time, concurrent to that, there's 8 to 15 acres of studio area to the south that is accessible from Siringo, that could also occur in early phases. And that would sort of shift the balance of the site, sort of about the remaining 30 acres into later phases, reserving sort of the mixed use potential for a later date when additional connectivity could be secured in support of that. We talked about sort of a couple of other things just sort of related to that. Understanding that Fogelson and the theater it would be difficult to activate them at an early phase, given upgrades, and also I think the issues that were recognized around the speed at which nonprofits or other organizations might take over those spaces and get up to speed. And so what we looked at for an early phase was the activation of public spaces around those buildings in sort of that north-south spine that could also sort of feed off of that phase 1 residential core. There also was discussion about connecting, making strong east-west connections to sort of the independent tenanting that could occur of Benildus Hall that you can see there at 2C, and establishing connections in the east-west direction, as well as sort of establishing and making pedestrian and bicycle improvements along the north-south spine to sort of predicate the design of the future rhombus in that location, including potentially bike ped connections out to the bus stop at Cerrillos. Some of the other things that were discussed, the surface parking lots that are serving the public buildings would remain in the first phase, with the idea that they could be replaced by consolidated structured parking or a structured parking strategy in later phases once that actually could be made viable. Reserving, again, opportunities for residential and sort of other types of mixed use, which could be more intense than a phase 1, which actually might focus on sort of predominantly 3-story structures along the north-south spine.
Stefan, do you want to say about the stormwater, our understanding of the infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. I think what was determined yesterday is that there needs to be some additional investigation on this, but of course, Alumni Drive is largely built out to some extent. The configuration of the street might need to be altered or modified, but there are existing utilities, again, under the street that could likely service and accommodate a phase 1 development. So I think more work needs to be done to understand the real, the intensity of improvements that would need to be required to accommodate development on these early sites. Of course, it would require the demolition of the existing dormitory structures and initial improvements to free up those sites for new development. The east-west streets, which are shown here, would be new, which of course would need to be accompanied by infrastructure that would stub off of anything that is existing under Alumni Drive. It was our conclusion yesterday that more investigation needs to be done to really understand the capacity of what's there and the degree to which short-term improvements could be made to facilitate development in this area.
And how they could be funded.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Anybody want to expand? I think we already discussed the fact that all of these uses that are envisioned in this initial phase would be permitted, would be qualified uses under the link. We did have a lengthy discussion about water rights and why the link is valuable with respect to that. What else? Any questions or additional points?
Just a brief one. So, looking at this, the idea is that the density gradient increases from east to west across the site, with the contemplating townhomes on the small small parcel on the eastern side of Alum Drive, pushing into apartments to the west that would be surface parked initially, and as the development proves out, that could sort of transition to structured parking associated with development on the eastern side of the Ramblas. So it's a good sort of staged way to be able to park and sequence. But the key to this is that the value piece is in the center. That gets hold out for last, and the key to unlocking that is the ability to be able to implement structured parking. Without that, it becomes a much more challenging, sort of condition here.
Questions, comments? We did have quite a robust discussion after following this, so we could maybe pivot into kind of what that robust discussion was. Maybe James, you want to?
Dina, just really quickly, would this be the time to maybe talk about the idea that I brought up earlier about the possibility and benefit of incorporating that portion at the northeast corner of the site that's currently owned by Forest Properties? Or is that?
So Eli, yes, and we probably ought to. I'm doing a double take. I have the same thing on my other screen. I think we've pushed on that conversation pretty hard, and it's gone from very productive to crickets chirping and a little bit in between. And I think I'd put it in the same category. I wouldn't want to bet everything on that, but I wouldn't want to do anything to close that off either.
And I bring it up because it seems to me that really changes, or maybe it doesn't, but it could potentially change how we're treating that sort of eastern boundary of the site, right? I think the phase one that we discussed yesterday was sort of thinking of that as a pretty hard edge. But if we're talking about.
So could Stefan or Drew, whoever has this open, could you mark what we're talking about on this aerial?
Yeah, and then and Eli, I was thinking maybe Mark could weigh in a little bit. He's had more direct conversations with them lately than anybody, about how to incorporate that into the plan. But yeah, I think we're on the same page that would be much better off if that was porous and fluid and gave us access out to Llano and into St. Mike's. And like every real estate development at this stage, there's enough uncertainty there where you don't want to bet the farm on it. But you do everything you can to make that happen, and try not to do anything, if you can help it, that would close it off. I think that's been our approach. And Mark, would you add anything to that?
I think the only thing I could add is that they really have a desire to have their building form and their development form integrate well with the Midtown campus, that they see that whole area as being potentially integrated. So they, rather than have a back to their site, which there is now right where that line is being drawn, and we have talked about ways to find access to Llano, which have to go through their property. And they would like to face into the Midtown campus if possible. And that's why we were looking at that narrow strip, which is, I think, got a 8B, or anyway, I can't see the number on it, but anyway, that could get integrated in so that we could rethink access both all the way through to the park. In our original master plan form, although the buildings are very blocky, does identify some mutual objectives that we were trying to achieve with that property owner. So we'd like to keep those discussions alive, whether or not, you know, our schedules are going to align or not is yet to be seen.
Because I
And
think the
based-
concept that came up earlier in our conversations was talking about sort of a new front door for the Midtown campus. It seems to me that this property provides that opportunity, more so than just around sort of integrating, but it really kind of becomes almost sort of the main focus, and some of the east-west connections that are sort of being presented on this drawing, I think, become much more important in terms of the connectivity hierarchy than they may be presented in that phase one drawing. And so, you know, in talking about sort of game changers or things that really sort of could greatly impact our overall thinking and approach to phase one and phases beyond, and overall framework to the site, it seems like that is really critical, and not to be sort of left to, like, if we can, it'd be great, but should be more of a priority in my mind. But I don't know.
So Eli, we I covet the cuttery, and when we've spoken with the you know, with forest properties, we've you know, what we found out is that there's a it's much beloved, you know, almost.
James, we've lost you.
Yeah, we lost you. Well,
Anybody else want to
I can add a
guess what
couple of
what
points
James's
over.
point was?
I can make a couple comments while James has come back in. Eli, I think attitude, we look at it the same way. We have to find a way to integrate that parcel and the planning of that into ours. Very beneficial potential outcomes for both parties. As far as the access, particularly the part to Yano, is very important. I don't know that it doesn't take away our need for a Cerrillos road, but it does improve our visibility substantially. So we think there's a lot of opportunities. There are drainage issues and some other things that we have to overcome, but that really emphasizes the need to do this early planning jointly.
Sorry, are you talking about the piece of property south of that freight area, or that?
Can we go back to let's go back to this. So there's the big vacant piece there, which is actually where that second road is shown, I believe.
Sorry, it keeps switching back and forth.
Yeah, I'm gonna maybe draw. I think we're talking about, there's this parcel right here.
No, we're talking about
that whole thing.
Yep.
This, yeah, and that includes this piece here, which is vacant. And then
Yep.
right now there is the hardware store is in a small strip mall that is sitting up here.
Yeah, the aerial photo will show the strip mall, which is Thomas Properties, as well as the vacant strip below that, which is also owned by Thomas Properties.
Okay.
And
I had
so
assumed that was owned by the public schools. That's why I was asking.
Yeah,
I'm gonna switch
go
to this
right
for a
up.
sec so everybody can understand. Does everybody see the aerial now?
Yep.
Yep. So the vacant property we see as a path of least resistance.
This guy.
When we talk more specifically with them, that's actually where they're thinking about starting the redevelopment. In that, I have that right, Mark?
Yep.
That was their phase one. But what we quickly moved to is multiple points where there could be, and again, I describe it as porous nature of their redevelopment, where instead of blocking everything off and facing away, you know, they'd have connection points that would extend through their site into the campus. And, you know, sequencing and all of those kind of things are to be determined. And again, you know, it's just in today's environment, how quickly a redevelopment plan could be pulled together drives a lot of the utility, or the short-term utility. Long-term, I mean, you'd want to get 2 or 3 points where you could flow through that site into the campus.
So to sum up, I think the idea here is that to have this property, including the vacant land and the strip mall to the north, would be ideal. And it's something to consider in a discussion of our further phase 1. Again, I think that as a next step, I don't, that's sort of a possible next step, is a further exploration of phase 1.
Can I just make a point on that? The reason why we wanted that long narrow strip where we were talking about townhouses or apartments in the phase 1 is that would then enable us to negotiate with more confidence and more certainty with Thomas in terms of how we could work together.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's kind of a strategy piece that we're noting, right? And bringing forward. It's important.
Absolutely.
So we did have a summary session yesterday. So the idea is that we did begin to frame up what could potentially be a value creator. I think if you added in the Thomas properties, then the infrastructure question gets expanded because then what do they have? So there would be more, we would need more, or somebody would need to at least do some wrecking ball math, as it were, to determine whether or not this is feasible. But I think the point, and maybe James, now that you're back on, you can answer this question. Even if this were to happen as a phase 1 that allowed the campus to really have those hard corners that you had identified early on with the access to St. Michael's, it does not take away from the need for the access to Cerrillos in your understanding of how the value creation would work for the phasing of the site. You're on mute, James. You're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, I see it now. Sorry about that. No, I think it's just a different circle. I think, how much value you could create if you had both is bigger than how much value you could create if you had one, which is, it's just sort of the bull. You kind of get down to the bullseye where the value creation opportunity gets smaller, the less you have, and I think I think it would impact. It just impact commercial viability, commercial user viability. I think is one of the places where I've seen that. Our highest value dirt might be less marketable if we had less, or would be less marketable. We have less access.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Any other points? I mean, we do sort of flow into the conversation from yesterday, from the final session of yesterday, which was in some ways sort of an iteration of some of the discussion we've already had. I think in terms of key points, I think everybody looked at this phase 1 and said, yeah, sort of more or less it makes sense. But I think that the underlying challenges around entitlement risk, now I'm kind of capturing what I think we heard from the development team yesterday around the access points, the kind of long-term certainty around access points, the entitlement risk, all of those things none of those things get resolved by identifying phase 1. It's just really a question of does this phase one in terms of these programmatic steps, does this phase one help to fit into an overall understanding of the steps that need to be taken, where things need to go? Yeah.
I think we're good. We agree.
Okay, great. Okay. I did want to say that James made an important point about, again, about the funding and financing, which I just want to make note of, was that by imposing big impact fees, that doesn't help the project feasibility. So, but that goes back to the funding and financing. Yeah, and then there's a lot to talk about in terms of the kind of the implications all of this has for the nitty gritty of the ENA, but I think that's the sort of smaller group discussion that we want to have from 11:30 to 12:30, as it were. And then let's see, I'm just looking back through my notes.
Hey, Dina, I had one other thing I wanted to add to the
Please.
first phase.
Yeah.
You know, it's a logical, it's a logical approach. We have no qualms about that. The one caution that I had was I didn't want to just kick the can down the road with the phase one and leave the bigger pictures, gas and storm drainage, unresolved or unaddressed.
Right.
It have the potential, if we didn't deal with it, to just pile more problems onto a smaller amount of real estate and magnify the intensity of the problem. And so I think we have to be prepared to, if we could come up with a temporary stormwater problem for phase one, we could end up with a bigger problem for 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Right. Yes. Everything needs to be looked at in the context of a larger master plan.
Right. Yeah.
And I think one of the questions this raises, again, for both the entitlements process and for the ENA discussion, is how much detail needs to be done in order to allow a phase one to go forward that situates phase one within the larger infrastructure framework. Right. So that's another question. This is an unknown, right?
Yes.
Okay. Questions, comments? We have a large group of participants here. Many of you are hearing either some or all of this for the first time. So anybody want to comment, ask questions? I think we did talk about the potential for what my colleague Sarah Woodworth called a lightning strike use. That would be, the kind of a best case scenario, say the University of New Mexico. I'm just picking on UNM because I'm seeing Tim's black box here, but say the university got a big grant and was able to go in and immediately build their a facility that would be training, or that would do something with community college, or the hospital said, yes, we're ready to move forward with this nursing program, or whatever it is, that there would be the opportunity to accommodate that in a phase one, but that we also acknowledge that the market conditions, because of COVID, have really impacted a lot of the partners who had really originally intended to come in, which is one of the reasons why this land value discussion is so important, is that the market itself might need to be more of a near-term driver than was anticipated early on, because early on, some of these other institutional partners perhaps could have come to the table and created some of the value that might started to create some value uplift. So just trying to, again, articulate what these relationships are. How the thinking has changed as a result of COVID. On the other hand, I think everybody agrees that there is a lot of demand for housing right now. In Santa Fe, that's not a contested question. It's really a question of at what price. The construction costs and the sales prices are set by the broader market conditions, and it's always the land that is the thing that gets pushed down to make the equation work. So I think that's really an important point in here, and I think that's been the point that James has been trying to drive home. But I think as a result of this 3-day discussion, we've really crystallized the implications of all these interconnected parts in a way that might not have been completely linked and lined up in a clear way.
Dana, I think you did a really, you said what I tried to say in a lot of words and a very few, which I appreciate. And I'm toggling off and on, just so you'll know. Apparently I've got an unstable connection, so I have to turn off my camera periodically to be able to hear. But I just wanted to say, I thought you took something I took about an hour to say and summed it up very quickly.
Okay, good. Okay, well, I've been paying attention when you speak, so yeah. And again, I think that the whole point of the charrette was to find a common understanding and a common vocabulary for everybody. I think what I didn't say at the beginning of this session, but I should have said, and Regina said really well at the beginning of day one, was that the city's intent to coming to the table is really to create a partnership, so everybody can really work together, and having a common understanding of the issues, and really being able to see them in a context and know what their interrelationships are, because as we've discussed many times, this is an iterative and somewhat circular process. So getting everybody kind of understanding what the relationship is among these moving parts, and how if you dial one up, it dials another down, and so forth and so on, has been an important achievement, I hope.
Dina, can I add one thing when we're talking
Yes,
about housing?
please.
And
Yeah.
I'll make it real quick. So on the housing piece, in regards to, we were talking about funding options, and that was totally separate. We were talking about IRBs and all that. If we could add that to the equation as well. I know that in government, there are a lot of housing assistance programs. So I'd like to also see adding that to the list of funding options from a housing perspective.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And I think that was one of the reasons why we identified a primarily residential first phase, was because we know that there are those options. The other, just I would say generally from my experience, and I think that the city of Santa Fe is very open to this, but once you do a plan and everybody kind of has a shared understanding, really helps city staff make the case to their policymakers and to their partners not within the city about why funding and financing options should be focused in a particular location, as opposed to diffusing investments around the city. So this eventually goes back to the cost benefit analysis. So I think that the housing subsidy, the ability to access outside sources like LIHTC, et cetera, are all an important part of the thinking here. And one of the reasons why we're hoping that housing could be a first phase. So thank you, Thaddeus.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anybody else? Gosh, this group is so quiet. Mark, you just flashed on. Do you want to say something, or you just want to see all our shining faces? You want us to see your shining face? Okay, you'll take yourself off mute. Well, if not, then we might be at a good stopping place. We have kind of worked through 2 sessions with no break. Daniel, I don't know if you and Michael, I think I saw Michael earlier. I don't know if you want to start your session a little early. We were supposed to start at, I believe, oh wait, I think maybe we totally worked through. No, we said we would pick it up at 11:20. So maybe what we should do is take like a 10-minute. Oh, then we would, I'm sorry. It's a little bit of the time zone shift of trying to work in 2 time zones at once. So we're at 11:06 right now. And we still have 2 more topics of conversation that are important. One is the community process. And the other is a more kind of a smaller group to talk about next steps for the ENA. I don't know if people have the flexibility to go a little bit longer in this morning session, or how we kind of want to divide up the next hour and 15 minutes that we are scheduled to have. So if people want to put forward a proposal that could potentially incorporate a little break in there, that would be great. Or we could just keep rolling.
Dina, I think some of the Team Midtown folks have got a real hard stop at 12:30.
Okay.
And if we could break a little before, that's even better. But we know you scheduled to 12:30, so we're available, but not much longer.
Not much beyond. Okay.
And, so if we could, we've enjoyed being with everybody for the last 2.5 days, but we have things piling up. As
Yeah, I think we probably are all in that same boat.
Well, if I could real quick, Philip, to that point, do you feel that you and I had talked about sort of understanding our takeaways? Do you feel the process she's had so far has allowed you to understand what takeaways you have?
Absolutely, Rich.
I
think Dina's done a great job. I think each of the staff members have done a great job. I hope we've done a good job of articulating the business context that we all find ourselves in. So as you know, we had some serious observations about how this needed to go, but I think we're pleased with the time we've spent and where we are. And we still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
And I really think, at least from our standpoint, I'll let James and Bill and everybody else chime in. I think we've established a common understanding of the facts on the ground. We may not agree 100%, but on the big picture items, I think we've identified the big picture. I think on many items, we've got concurrence. And a big one is that we're tearing down most of the buildings. There's no commercial value to the site today.
And why that's important.
And then that kind of informs everything else. So even though we may not have solved everything, which was not the expectation, I think we've set a very good foundation. And I think we all have a lot of homework to do because, but I think the homework will be more productive than it would have been before because we can focus on the big pictures. And I think we can also take away some of the agreements that we've had on some of the big items. And so I think it's been helpful. In fact, I would tell you, Rich, you'll get a kick out of this. It's been surprisingly helpful. So thank you.
Good.
Love that.
Good. No, we had talked about timing, so I wanted to just ask you that question because you and I had talked about having a takeaway session, but it sounds like you're able to extract what things you wanted to take away. And I think you got your thesis out. And so I'm glad that, we've been able to articulate the issues that you have. So, okay.
James and Bill, do you guys have any comments to add? Because I don't want to be a one-man opinion here. We're a consensus group.
Oh, I think you summed it up nicely.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Aaron, do you want to weigh in on the ENA discussion versus the community participation and the DPAC?
Yeah, the earlier we can have that, we're actually scheduled to do a pre-council meeting.
The earlier we can do which?
The ENA.
Okay.
The parts that I would be involved in. And Sally and Eli we're supposed to meet with the mayor on some council issues.
Daniel and Michael, do we think, is there like a 10-minute summary that you could do? Like we could take a 10-minute break, come back and do sort of 10 minutes of DPAC, and then everybody who's not part of the ENA discussion signs off, and then we would have our full hour for the ENA discussion.
Dina, I don't think that Daniel's here. I don't think Daniel or Michael are on the call right now.
Oh, okay, okay. So they're not
back
even
until 11:30.
expecting to come back till
Yeah.
11:30. So,
Yeah.
well, then maybe we should just let them know that we're gonna skip the DPAC. I think that I think everybody understands that community engagement is a huge issue. Someone's starting to say something.
I'm sorry, Dina.
Oh, Daniel.
Daniel just
Daniel
returned.
just joined.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Daniel, where are you?
I'm here.
Okay, so we are just finishing up the kind of the big summing up and review of what we've accomplished so far. We all agree that this has been a very productive conversation, but we only have an hour and 20 minutes left. Everybody has a hard stop at 12:30. So we're trying to figure out how to balance three things. One is to have a short break. Two is to when and how to discuss the DPAC. Is that something we could just quickly summarize? Or is it something we should table for a further discussion in order to really get in on the, be able to get to the meat of the ENA, which is the much smaller group?
I think the meat of the ENA is probably most important. I mean, we can do a very quick sort of overview because maybe we can kind of make the elephant in the room a little teddy bear. I think that there's a way of kind of minimizing the concern fairly quickly, but yeah. So I mean, if you want to just do a quick kind of review after the break.
Could we actually do ENA from 11:30 to noon? Because there's several of us that need to be a part of that conversation that also have another conflict starting at noon that we can't miss. And so that would be a better use of the three of ours time, I think.
Okay, well, so I think unfortunately then we might, so I think the point is that the ENA discussion might take higher precedent. I think as a next step, I would add as a next step would be to look at the ENN process, the early neighborhood engagement, and the DPAC in more detail to understand better what the intersection is, how those things overlap, schedule. I think that was the kind of the main point that the development team was trying to perhaps raise, was how can we mitigate the entitlement risk through the participation process. Let's just say we heard that. We know this is a concern, and we would just add that to the list of things that kind of need to be further explored. Is that an acceptable way to move forward? And then we can break for a few minutes and come back and start the ENA discussion.
Yeah, Dina,
and that also allows all the broader partners to just be excused.
Yeah, Dina, I think you summed it up really well. I would add one thing. I think I want everybody to know we believe that coordination is the most critical component of that. That you know, if we see risk for everybody involved, if we don't go about this in a highly coordinated way and let DPAC do their job, let our job, you know, our work in the community support what they're working on. So that the city gets feedback you need, but we don't set any false expectations or create awkward situations for either party.
Got it. Okay, so everybody is on message all the time.
Yeah. And we're listening. We don't listen to one set of feedback and act on it, and then put somebody in a really awkward situation when they go out to get something similar.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. That's perfect. Okay, with that, it's now 11:15. Should we say we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back at 11:25 for the people who are involved in the ENA discussion? And that gives us 35 minutes instead of just 30 for Eli and Sally, whoever else needs to go. Does that work? So thank you to everybody who has been here with us for the last 2.5 days. And it's been very, very helpful. And then now everybody who's not part of the ENA can just sign off. The rest of us, Drew, perhaps you can set your wonderful counter for 10 minutes and we'll be back. Thank you. I noticed that the counter is not counting down. But we should be coming back in 1 minute.
Great time for the clock to stop.
Okay, we are now at 25 past the hour. Sorry, I'm just catching up on all the messages I missed.
Yes, there is another world out there, isn't there?
Well, some of these are related to okay. Let's see. I am expecting Aaron and Andrea to lead this phase. There they are.
I think Marcos will be involved as well.
And
probably.
Marcos as well, Rich also. So I want to be sure we have everybody here. And then also, I don't know if you have any issues about who is part of this call, or if there's if you're fine with whomever participating.
I think whoever from each team is helpful is fine.
Okay, great.
Well, I think, I'm not sure who it was, but I think there had been some thought that the developer's request would be the first thing we talked about. Is that accurate recollection?
Philip, do you have, well, yeah, we sort of talked about that, but Philip, I don't know if you have a starting point for this. Again, looking at you as the spokesperson for your team, but maybe others want to speak on your team's behalf.
Yeah, I don't think we've got a starting point other than some of the practical issues we've raised on how to change the ENA. And Aaron, what may be most helpful, because we do seem to bump into what the city can do and how it can do it. And we're all a little bit at a disadvantage because we certainly don't have your background on kind of city procedures. Would it make sense to give us a 2 or 3 minute tutorial about the EF&I process and then how the ENA fits into that? Because I think I'll ask the direct question. Our premise for entering into this agreement with the, well, to even participate as a responder was based on a set of market and value assumptions that no longer exist. I think we both sides, city, developer, believes there's no immediate commercial value to the site as it exists. That fundamentally changes really everything. And so I'd like, if you wouldn't mind, give us a couple of minute tutorial step back. You know, what can the city do in the process they've gone through, and where are the areas that are flexible for us to recraft a relationship? Because where we're would like the city to go, if the city can, is a more true partnership. There's not much upside as we can see today. There's a bunch of risk, and we're going to have to craft an effective partnership to try to align our interests together the best we can. And we know there's some restrictions on how the city can operate in the procedure you've gone through so far. If you could just give us kind of the outer boundaries of it and the background. And I think that will help us go back to our team and say, look, here's what the city, here's the process. Here's what we know needs to change, but here are the points where we bump in to the city's process. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm
Yeah, I
articulating.
think so. Yeah, and I'll say a couple of things, and then Marcos and Andrea might want to add in.
Perfect.
I guess so. Yes, I think that's helpful, Phil. Thank you. So the RFEI essentially set out certain things that the city was looking for, and the master developers responded to one of the 4 different types of proposals that we were looking for. So things that were written in the RFEI as to what the city's lower and parameters were, we can't change at this point. So we couldn't suddenly say we're working on a different site or we have different overarching goals or that kind of thing. So I would look at the RFEI as setting out the scope of what was possible, and then the developer's response to that RFEI potentially further narrows what's possible. For example, and this was memorialized in the ENA, the team is a potential place where we need to understand changes to the team, and then we have the right to accept or not accept changes to the team. So that's one of the areas where, and that is because the master developer was selected based in part on who was on the team. So that's an example of where it's not a hard bar to continuing if you change your team. And I understand there are contemplated changes to the team, but it's something that the city has the right to review and make a decision at that point. And we'd have to look at the significance of the change and who's substituted, if someone's substituted, and what that looks like. So that, I think, those are kind of the big sweeps of how the city looks at this. And then certainly as it relates to any particular element, we would have to look at the RFEI, and then we'd have to look at what the proposal was and what it is the city selected the developer based on, and what kind of change we're talking about. And then we look at the ENA, and depending on what the changes, the city would need to, we can't just make unilaterally beneficial changes to one party, right? So we would have to look at how does this still make sense to the city? So if we're removing an obligation that was created in the ENA and was not required in the RFEI, why there needs to be some sort of, it can't be just a one-sided, non-supported decision.
Aaron, could you just give us a couple of examples so we can kind of think about this?
Yeah, so I mean, so I think one of the big requests is the timeline modification.
Yep.
And I think, I'm not sure that, I'm not sure if that falls directly on one side or the other in terms of benefit, but I think we would just need to understand how that works to know if it does or not. Because I think one of the questions that we raised with you and James during some of the discussions about the Garson lease was, if we're changing the timeline, is it proportionally for each stage of what's contemplated in the agreement currently? Because there was a timeline, there was like a 6-month, and a 9-month, that kind of thing. Does the extension fall proportionally in each of those, sections of the timeline, or is it more in one versus another, given the challenges that are being faced? So I think that would be important to understand for us too. So that one might just be making sure that we're clear about how we incorporate it into the ENA. I'm not sure if that's a good enough example. You have, so other than I know the timeline was a request. You're talking about more of a partner. I'm not sure any sort of partnership was not contemplated in the RFEI. Certainly there were certain obligations that the developer would be expected to complete in the RFEI.
Aaron, might I jump in at kind of about some of the financing just to explain maybe a framework? So under the RFEI, we had a section in that explained we were requesting that a respondent provide financial phasing, how they wanted to move forward with implementation of financing it, with a caveat paragraph saying that the city had a toolbox of resources, which we discussed many of yesterday, that would need to be triggered by the respondent. That was memorialized in the ENA in a specific way that explained the development framework and phasing and entitlements, and that those were the responsibilities of the developer. Now, that doesn't mean that those things don't trigger partnership with the city. And what I mean by that is, with a finance plan, you would be bringing forward, this is our phasing, this is our financing schedule, this is how we need to move forward. But these are the places that we need to have the city partner with us. So infrastructure. We need the city to figure out how they're going to assist with us in infrastructure. We would like to utilize these resources. We're looking at a metropolitan redevelopment district, or we're thinking, you know, this is the process we would like you to go forward with, or the studios, we'd like to do a LEDA project on that. And so can we start the process of envisioning that? I think that's the partnership mechanism that is created in the ENA. And so that's basically where the developer is putting forth financing or scheduling and asking of the city, what's the application process for the next step? So that's the way that our ENA has envisioned our partnership, but it needs to be triggered, and at least in terms of the RFEI and the ENA, by the developer.
And none of that's foreclosed under the current agreement, and none of it would be under a change, I don't think.
Okay, well, I'm trying to figure out the best way to attack this and to get, really make some progress. We can start with some general thoughts on how we'd like to move forward, or we can take a couple of specific things we've already bumped into and use those as examples. What do you think, Aaron, would be best?
I think either could work. I just thought, so one of the other things I think the developers asked for is a change to the termination rights.
Right.
So that's an example where if we were just unilaterally change them, we could change them to be entirely favorable to the developer, but that's not what the city would want. We would want to, if we provide a change that's helpful to the developer, I think what we'd look for is that more performance specific terms, so that way the city could live with that without the ability to terminate. So basically we would add in more specific language about, you know, there isn't just a at will ability to terminate, but there are these, this is how you would terminate, and we'd have to be very specific about what that would look like. So that's an example of how we would, you know, consider that request, and that's fine, but we would build in how does the city protect itself, because we can't just have 2 years without the ability to terminate and the possibility that nothing would happen. We can't hear you.
If we're trying to create a fair partnership, I don't think we would expect a one-way street. But at the same time, so here's the fundamental introduction to this topic that I think we need to make. One, the city wisely said, let's go find some great developers. Let's find a way to get their best ideas. Let's come up with a plan that works with the city. Let's get something built on Midtown. The developers applied, and all of us did. And we're partnering with a lot of the former people that applied. So I think I can speak on behalf of at least 3 or 4 of them, that we all assumed there was a profit opportunity here. As of today, under the current circumstance that we've all gone through for the last 2 days, we don't see an immediately a viable profit opportunity. So we have to change the relationship so that we are more aligned in interest. You can't ask a counterparty to take all the risk, do all the work with an uncertain result. And that can be, you know, so I think I'm worried that the structure we are all in here is so restrictive that we may not be able to create that alignment of interest that we really need that reflects the reality of Midtown today. And so I just raised that point, and I think we all need to go back to our corners and think about it. But let's talk about some specific examples. So one, that's the big picture. which is our partners cannot take the risk that we've been asked to take now, well, knowing what we all know. There's no commercial value to the project today. So we have to take a step back and figure out, okay, now, where do we go with that? So here's some specific examples. We aren't changing members of the team. We will today and we will in the future. And we really can't be restricted by going through a process every time we need to add a member or take a member out. This will be a fluid process over the next, I think what we've heard today, it's a 2 or 3 to 5 to 10 year approach. So that's kind of one issue. The second one, Aaron's one we talked about on Garson. We're going to have different capital partners, different management teams for different aspects of the project. So it's hard to tie execution of a parcel by parcel into an ENA that governs the whole campus. Just 2 examples. And so I think we've got to find some elegant solutions that give us the flexibility that we need and the ability to make the risk investments we're all asking our team members to make in this current structure. And so we know the current ENA and the timelines no longer work for anybody. We know it's unfair for us or you to terminate each other at a moment's notice at this stage. And I know unlikely to happen, but there are some things that I think we need to kind of go back and think about how we do this. And to be productive, I'm worried about, we're going to be meeting with all of our partners on Monday. We're going to share all this. We'll elicit their responses. I think this has been a very good session to highlight where the campus is and where we need to go with it. But I'm worried that the ENA agreement today doesn't really allow that to happen as elegantly as we'd like for it to happen.
Yeah. And Phil, can I ask you a question, and maybe Aaron can lay it out? Am I interpreting what you've said now to believe that you want the ENA to be flexible so that you could find the right partners to make this land commercially valuable? Because right now your assumption is there is no commercial value. So the flexibility I think you're looking for is are you finding capital or programming or development partners to persuade them to build commercial value, or what are we trying to get to? Because it seems like the ENA needs to have some stake in the ground. It has one now, we all agreed to it. And so if we change it a bit, are we also saying that if another pandemic or recession happens, we're going to come back to the table and change it because of the conditions? Where does the city get leverage out of it, I guess is what I'm asking.
I don't really know how to answer that question. I don't, if we are going to try to create a partnership has to work for both sides. And we're not asking for a one-way street, but we're also asking the city not to put us on a one-way street either. We've all taken a big risk to get to this stage, you and us and with our partners. But the fundamental context on the ground has changed. We now know it. We all now know it a lot better. And it's a longer process. And now we're here working with you day in and day out the last 3 days because our heart of hearts tells us there's a good opportunity here somewhere. But we now know the hills that we're going to have to climb together to get there. So I don't know, Rich, if I'm answering your question, but listen, if when we gave you the 100-day assessment, we didn't run out of the room and say, see you later. We said, here's our assessment after 100 days. These are the things we need to focus on. And we're here up at bat. We're still up at bat trying to find a way to create the best value for Midtown. And when I mean value, it's not economic value for the developer and the developer partners, but it's also the best social value, civic value for the city of Santa Fe. We're trying to kind of marry both of those.
And Rich, another way to maybe think about this is it's not unheard of, but it's more unusual to tie a master developer to all of the vertical sort of follow-on developments that might come in support of that. They often arrive in two different means, I guess. Is that fair, Dina, from your perspective?
I'm sorry, Andrew, I was just looking at a message. Say it again.
Yeah,
Sorry,
just sort of talking about traditional role of a master developer is to seed the way for future vertical opportunities.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And to tie the vertical to the master is not a common practice. And so having an E&A that sort of anticipates, future use is limiting to somewhat when you've got such volatility in the market.
Yeah, I think that is correct, except in the very specific case of the film studio, which I think was a very important first step. So I don't want to speak on behalf of the kind of legal issues, but I also don't want to, it's a complicated issue for this particular context. So I'm not sure that the blanket answer.
Yeah, so I just to
I don't
clarify,
want that to drive how we I mean, there are so many scenarios for development on large scale projects like that. I mean, I'm working with Brookfield related, Mercy Housing, and all of them are both vertical and horizontal developers on large multi-acre parcels. So I don't think that we should use a paradigm that doesn't exist right now for this project, but we can change it if the proposal is that someone wants to be a vertical versus a horizontal developer. Maybe that's worth discussing.
I was going to clarify my earlier statement. So Phil talked about adding people being subject to this. Adding people, I don't think has any sort of process contemplated really. It's really substitution of partners who may have been part of the evaluated proposal. And so that's not prohibitive. It just makes sense, right? I mean, if there were people that made the presentation that was evaluated by the city, and that's the reason the proposal was accepted, then we need to know who's substituting that entity and give it, and it has to have been accepted by the city.
I would make a suggestion as one way to move forward in this discussion would be for the parties, both parties, to examine the E&A and see what makes sense still in it and what does not. And I would suggest that the developers begin by redlining the elements of the E&A that they think are no longer appropriate given the changing economic conditions that I've heard come from the master developers team through this Charrette's. But I think that the E&A itself is a very useful document because what it gives the city is information that it needs to know as the project. And that information helps us have the security to undertake many of the types of endeavors or requests that the master developers made of the city. But we can't really evaluate in a very informative way, at least, many of the assumptions that you've made or many of the requests that you've made in this charrette, and maybe you've made them in writing in the 100-day proposal and through other communications with the city. But I think all of the plans that are laid out in the E&A were meant to provide the city the information that it needs to know that this partnership is working. I think that there's a lot of ideas that we've collectively discussed, and I think there's opportunities in the E&A as it exists now to develop those ideas and say where the allocation of responsibility should fall on behalf of the developer or the city. And I look at sections like section 4.4, which describes the development budget and financing plan. I mean, much of our discussion has been about the financing plan. And this would provide the city an opportunity to understand what the market conditions are that you're seeing that make this so different from when you responded to the RFEI. And that type of information would help us then feel comfortable in saying, yes, we can support condemnation actions because there's real public use that's available to the public. Or yes, we can support designating this area as a metropolitan redevelopment district. But we can't make those decisions on our own without knowing some of the information that you have access to and some of the analysis you've done on market conditions. And that's why I return to the E&A repeatedly, because I think it's actually the opportunity for you to tell us, what it is you see in terms of is necessary in order to proceed, how you're evaluating the fair market value of the land, the basis, many of the other elements that are all present here that you've discussed in terms of the different world that we're now in. So I would just recommend this type of exercise go forward, because we know that we're going to need to amend the ENA anyway. I mean, we've heard about timelines, which is merely just a procedural element. But under the substantive elements, under the scope of work of Article 4, I think there we can get a lot of feedback from you via edits to this document, where you'd like to see this document go so that the project can be successful.
I'd just like to add on the things like the financial plan, nothing says the bottom line has to equal a positive number. It can say, here's where we're having a problem meeting the gap or something like that, which is why we're now coming to the city and proposing these various financial support opportunities through one of the many options we discussed yesterday, or any others we can identify. But it's hard for us to make it even, how do we support you if we don't even know what size of crutch, how do we know where the gap is? And so that without the plan that has the negative number at the bottom, it's a little bit of a vacuum for us.
And the goal of the ENA is really to get us to a disposition agreement. The ENA itself doesn't dispose of the property. We want to be able to develop the property in the best way for all parties. And so this agreement, the ENA itself, is an interim step. And if the conditions are such that the interim step that we contemplated in May are no longer applicable, again, we have to be consistent with the RFEI, but if they're no longer applicable and you see a way forward where you think that this is where the city needs to be a partner, the city needs to do X, the city needs to do Y, and the city needs to do Z in order for us to do A, B, and C, then I would suggest you make those proposals via amendments to the ENA, because right now there are performance measures in there which neither side are really meeting, because we're saying things have changed. Now, we knew things were changing a little bit because we do have some elements in there for COVID delays and extending the term, but maybe they didn't go far enough at that time. And so, again, I think that this is the bridge document by which we get to an ultimate agreement, which allows the developer to have, hopefully whatever it needs to make this site marketable, profitable, and good for the city.
I guess the ones that we know about so far, I think are possible. The requests that have been made that regarding term and termination clauses, we can do that. I think it's just that we know that those aren't going to happen in isolation, because there's been so many other substantive discussions about alluding to other parts of the agreement without specific requests.
I think Marcus raises a good point. The ENA was never the end result. It was just an interim step to get the end result. And I'm wondering if we should spend some time thinking about what the end result needs to be, and then work our way back into the ENA, how we need to get there. Because right now the ENA is based on an investment premise that none of us, we all, I think, collectively agree have changed pretty dramatically. None of us have given up on this project. We know there's an opportunity here. We just have to look at it a different way. And so I'm thinking that maybe what we should do is look at the DDA as well in very broad terms on where we'd like to end up, and then try to make sure the ENA drives us to that ultimate outcome. I'm still worried, and I just want to be really clear that the formal process that we've all entered into is a little bit restricting given the change of circumstance. And so we're going to have to be creative. The city's going to have to be creative. But I'm wondering if we start focusing on a big picture DDA to see where we want to end up, because I think that's going to be important for you, the city, to be able to explain why we need to make these changes. And it's going to be critically important to our team to know why we're still working on this deal. Here's the outcome that the city, that we think we can get to if these things happen. So I'm talking out loud because this is a very complicated process. We're bound by these documents that no longer work the way we had kind of hoped them to, given the changed circumstance. but we really share the same goal. What does it take to get Midtown built in a way that's a real asset to the city? So I've done most of the talking. James, I know you've got some strong feelings and others do as well. I'll be quiet, but I do think we now need to go back and take a big step back and look at the whole process in the DDA. Where do we want to end up? So the ENA drives us to that outcome. Does that make sense?
So, let me start with this. I think from our perspective, looking at the deliverables section, it seems like a lot of those are geared towards an entitlement process with a time frame that we no longer believe is achievable. I mean, I think that's area number one. This was the weekly meeting. If you look at the list of things that were on that list of deliverables, they were entitlement related as much as Eli was just thinking about, the list of things that we'd need to have a master plan that could be run through the process. It looks to me like that's a big checklist of things that we'd need to do to get there in a time frame that was I guess faster than we. I guess Eli's not on right now, or is he still? But it's probably a time frame where today we probably wouldn't sign up for that kind of time frame, knowing what we know. So I want to go, start there, Aaron. I hear your advice here to think about using this as a place where you could put issues on the table and get them resolved. But Philip, I just, this is one of those situations where you got to process what we talked about for the last 2 days, and you have to process what we're trying to accomplish. I'm not comfortable saying, yeah, we could sign up for this or that or the other at this point, because I think we need to think about it and not. And I'm going to go back to, we negotiated a lot of the details on this document the day before it went in the council package. And I'm going to tell you that some of the exhibits were in our hands very late in the day, and we didn't really have time to give it adequate thought. And I think if I look back on the one, if I could do any one thing differently, it would have been put more thought into that document than we were able to, given the fact that we negotiated it on a Sunday night. And I think that
but certainly, I think everything.
Aaron, you're cutting out.
You need your
You might want to
headset
kill
there.
your video. Yeah. Oh.
Better. Okay. I was just saying, I think I sent it out to the governing body Saturday night, but I mean,
Saturday
that's,
night, okay.
yeah, I mean, it was very last minute. I agree. We spent a lot of time on the phone the weekend before the governing body meeting, which certainly I think none of us was super excited about. So as to the exact time, as to those 48 hours, I'm not sure, but so yeah, I think that's the type of feedback we need. And I think all of us, learned a lot the last few days. So I think that's not surprising at all that we need to digest it. There was something else that I thought. Yeah, so timeline's definitely on the table. We understand that. I think the DDA is a really interesting concept, Phil, that we haven't talked through this in terms of making sure that our steps align with what is the desired DDA of the developers. And I don't know if you've done much thought into that yourselves. And I'm not sure I've really had that full conversation with the city. So I think that's an interesting framework to think about, and I don't see a disadvantage to that. I don't know if anyone else does.
Well, we don't get paid to sign up ENAs, and we don't get paid to do studies. We only get paid if we actually buy something, develop it, and make money. So the DDA is really the end result for us. And given, I think actually in hindsight, you do a lot of things differently. But going through the process we've gone through and the last couple of days been very helpful. I think that I would say that we should probably take a step back and look at the end result we're all trying to get to. And that's the DDA. And we shouldn't be talking about the ENA in a vacuum. We need to be starting with the end result and work our way back. So the more I've been thinking about that idea, the more happier I am with that idea, and think that's probably the approach we should at least take, is start with the big picture in mind and then work our way back into the ENA.
I think, Philip, you could combine that with what Marcos was suggesting, and even to the point Andrea was making earlier, the city needs to know your thinking on that.
Right.
So I think that it really would be incumbent upon you to sort of think about what's your end game, how do we get there, how do we understand that, what information do we need? And then you need to work from that point forward to how does this change what we think about what's in the ENA, and what are we willing to undertake or not undertake as a result of this, with a really clear set of expectations from the city. And this is where the points about the brownfields, all of those, kind of separate individual things need to be clarified with the clear framing of why the value proposition has changed for you. And I think we, as a result of this 2.5 day conversation, I hope that it's clearer for everybody about why the value proposition has changed, but and how that ties to land use. But I think really laying that out in terms that a layperson could understand, that really goes through it point by point, how that informs the ENA and how that leads to the DDA is really, you tell us.
Yeah, and I guess just to be, I guess what I'm saying is certainly we want the ENA to build up to a successful DDA. There are constraints on how the city disposes of land, and I don't know that we've talked through those. I don't know that we can agree to what the DDA would say, because we don't know what the land's going to look like at that point. So I hope I'm not confusing the issue.
No, I think yes, you have, but in an important way. We need to know what the constraints are with the city in disposing land. And if you're telling us that, we need to know what that is.
Sure. For example, it's subject to referendum potentially, depending on what type of disposition it is.
Okay. So can you give us, our whole team, a prep? Because one of the things that we anticipate the DDA to do is to transfer maybe a parcel to HomeWise and a parcel to Yes Housing and to the studios. And so how we can get to that point is going to be really important for us to know. And we run into that with the studios. It's a great example. So what are the restrictions on our ability to take parcels? If we don't buy the whole thing, can we do it in parcels? I think that's the conversation that we may need to have pretty quickly to understand, because it's not as simple as giving you a contract to say we're buying 65 acres at this price on this date. I think we need a little more visibility of what the city can do and what its procedures are to dispose of land.
Okay.
So,
we may already.
Phil, I have a suggestion that might actually take what we've done so far and help us put something on. So we have a phase 1 layout. We've got some ideas about what's there to work with, what's not there, and who might be a user for various parcels in that phase 1. And it could be something as simple as a process map of some variety that says that to get to a DDA, this and this and this and this would need to happen. The DDA would need to transfer this parcel at this time. These are the financing assumptions, and then these are the end users and the assumptions around transferring those developed parcels to the end user. It's just kind of follow the steps and do it in a kind of high level process map where I'd start out and say step number 1. is get the, brownfield designation started as quick as we can. Step number 2 would be move forward with additional physical assessments, engineering work, that kind of thing, and then put that on the table and see if our DDA, if our ENA matches up with that, because I've been thinking about that phase 1, and you got to go through a bunch of steps in the process to get to the point where somebody takes a parcel down, develops the parcel, and then delivers those developed parcels to the end users through different means for different partnerships. But yeah, there's, I think that's almost maybe the way that would focus everybody in on what's got to get done and how to structure an agreement to make sure it's consistent with those steps.
And I think that's exactly what we're trying to talk about, is that we need some type of strategy that comes out of this discussion. You need to give us that information. This isn't feasible monetarily without the city providing this, whatever it is. Once we know that, then we can start working on getting to the next step. But without that, really the city's just, negotiating with itself sometimes in isolation, trying to figure out what is the best tool to match. We have different options for affordable housing. We have different options for LEDA projects. And so if you throw out those projects, we have different options for nonprofits. So if you put that out there for us, then we can strategize to understand how can we meet that goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Andrea, that's a good point. And Philip, I was going to ask that question when James was speaking up about, you had sent the questions assumptions to us. And I'm wondering if some of that starts the conversation James is asking about the steps, because they're pretty big questions or pretty big assumptions. And I don't know whether they all have to have some place in the ENA, but I'm wondering if that's something we should discuss now, that hopefully we'll dig more into what the ENA, you want the ENA to be.
Rich, I think that's absolutely, that needs to inform the process and the end result. Absolutely. And I think, Andrea, I know all of us are a little bit exhausted because we've had double duty, 2.5 days of charrette and then 2.5 days of everything else that we put aside. Mm-hmm. We're scheduling time with our team on Monday to try to summarize this and to get, next steps, consensus. Rich, help us, and Dina, help us understand, what are y'all going to produce that we might be able to share with our team on what we've talked about? I know this has been a very productive day. I don't want to, it's been a productive week. I don't want to lose the conversations and consensus we built. How are we going to memorialize the work product that we've done in the last 2.5 days? And is there any way we can get pieces of that or all of it by Monday? I know, Rich, you've got a presentation you got to make on Wednesday. So, what can we have to start informing our team so we can go back to our corners and figure out how we re-engage?
And Phil, my presentation has been moved to the 15th because we did the charrette this week. But I think Dina and Daniel maybe can answer the question about what's the takeaway, what formalized documents we're going to receive from all that we've learned over the last couple of days.
Well, Rich, I mean, in writing the scope of work, again, everyone has that document, the scope of work document, and the draft agenda in it, and it ends with the set of deliverables. We'll go through the set of deliverables with Stefan and Dina post this day and identify which one seems like we can produce for that. But I would say refer to that, and we're going to try to, we'll refine it and send out a set of deliverables. But it'll be based on that.
But you won't have it by Monday.
Yeah, we're not going to have it by Monday. Do you have an ETA on when you think we might be able to, and again, it doesn't have to be all, it's probably a series. Do you have an ETA when we'll start getting material?
I don't think we can answer that without having an internal discussion of what it is we're producing. Okay. I would suggest that so the sessions have been recorded. Okay. And I think we did a very good, clear recap this morning. So if we could get you the link to the recording, at least from this morning's session, you could share that with your partners potentially, and that goes through what all the points of agreement, disagreement, or gaps were, and then also walks through the kind of thinking around a phase one, the access points, of kind of a general framework. So that might be one interim solution for you.
Okay. And, we're trying to move as fast as we can, and we may have unrealistic expectations on our end to have things done by Monday, but whatever you can share with us, and if it's just the recording, that may be what we have to go on. And if we need to push back, we will, but time is money here and for us all, and we're trying to push this ahead as fast as we can, so. Okay. Well, I know we're bumping up into some deadlines that Aaron and others had with the mayor. We don't want you to keep Alan waiting.
Yeah.
Do we need to cover while we're all together here and make before we break for our, from the charrette?
Go ahead, Aaron.
Is the developer team willing to do what Marco suggested in terms of a red line on the substantive provisions? I think we've got the request regarding some of the timelines and rights of termination. We know we have those requests, but as to the remainder of it, I mean, so I'm hearing that one of the exhibits is concerning. So like we don't have any proposed red lines to that exhibit at this point, or even just overarching requests regarding it yet. Is that something the developer is willing to do as a next step?
I think the answer is yes, but I'm wondering if we need to put it in context of the DDA outline as well. So I think let us think about how to engage with the city and communicate to the city what we need to be a successful master developer for you. I know it's easy to go back to an existing document and do amendments, but I do think it has to be done in the broader context as well. I think we need to try to do both.
Okay, thanks.
Did I answer your question, Aaron?
I think so. It sounds like you're going to consider it.
Yeah.
And get back to us.
And again, recognize.
So we should not redline something because I'm not. Yeah. The only thing we know are the specific earlier requests.
I wouldn't redline anything at this stage. I think we need to come back and concept, and then we can work on redlining.
Okay.
Let's try to be efficient with our time and energies here.
Yep. Agreed. Okay, I am going to join the pre-council meeting with the mayor. It's about a totally separate land use issue that we're a legislative issue on short-term rentals for tonight. So
good for you.
Yes. Thank you.
All
right.
Thanks a lot.
Well, Rich and Dina, any other kind of concluding thoughts or comments before we head off?
No, I think the most immediate next step is we'll get you a link to the recordings for the session. So you can have that to share with your partners.
And can we get a link to I know there was a lot of material that we put up on boards.
Yes, the concept board link is that's been shared already, but we'll share it again.
If you don't mind sharing it again, some folks had trouble getting into it. But I think that would be very helpful. And Dina, I just want to say it's not easy being a moderator. You said, I said air traffic control because I was trying to be polite. I think your background, a kindergarten teacher might be a good analogy as well. You let us all play in the sandbox together. And I think it was a very productive session in the sandbox. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. And yeah, this is what a charrette's all about, as you know, is just getting everything out there and then trying to synthesize it in the clearest way possible. So I will say that I assume that one of the deliverables for one of the deliverables from our team will be a summary of the notes. So that's something you can look forward to, but given like you, I have a lot that's been deferred, so it's not going to happen quickly. Just FYI. We'll do it as soon as possible. And then Daniel and Stefan and I and Rich will caucus about what else.
Right. And again, whatever, even if it's just a high level summary, whatever you can share as it comes out, and don't wait for it to be a nice, neat package.
Okay.
It will not be a nice, neat package. So whatever can come out as quick as it can come out. And
okay.
Then we'll give comment to it and maybe help refine it. So,
okay.
So we want to be collaborative in the process.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rich?
James, Bill, do you guys have anything before we conclude?
Phil, I'd just like to thank all the facilitating team. Did a great job of kind of marching us through it, changing when we needed to change our approach, and getting it boiled down to the things we need to get on the table. So thank you a lot. It's been good working with you.
Thank you.
I appreciate city staff and everybody's time.
And
Yeah, and city staff, thank you for your creativity. It's been really great, sort of having your thoughts sort of help enhance, the possibilities here. So that's been really great.
Yeah, and I'd also say I feel like we're in a 2.0 mode, Master Developer 2.0, and so I think the charrette was very informative for our Master Development Committee, our steering committee, and I'm hopefully, it sounds like from the Team Midtown side too. I think it was very informative, and I appreciate Dina's moderating work and Stefan and Drew and what they've done in creating that concept board and for us to share all the information. So, but I also know that there are 5 things I think that are hard issues that we need to resolve. We still need to resolve. I think as long as we walk away knowing that we need to figure out how to resolve those as we get to what we want in an ENA or what we want in a DDA, that's the important part, that we need to continue this conversation to make that happen.
Thank you to everybody that participated and stayed with it the whole time and really gave it their best, whether you were just listening and monitoring or whether you were participating in the conversation. It wouldn't have happened without everybody being there.
Yep.
Ready? Well, the wave hello and the wave good.
Yeah, is it civic engagement left, or we're done with that? Daniel, is Daniel here? Michael,
I think Daniel is
civic engagement
here. I think that we kind of agreed that civic engagement, to the extent that there's a list of next steps of things that need to be addressed, and this goes to the issue of what might need to be modified in the ENA, that coordination between the ENN process for the master plan and the DPAC is a huge thing that could, if it's done well, it could really help. If it's done badly, it could really hinder. So, and the specifics of how that could work, we agreed we could be addressed at a later time.
Gotcha. And Dana, I'd like to have Stefan, if you could, just any closing thoughts on all the work that's been done and, your viewpoint on this.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rich. We'll make the final concept board available to everyone. What we'll do is we'll lock that as a PDF. And then if we have to
Stefan, you're cutting in and out. Maybe you want to turn your video
we
off.
can sort of continue. Okay. Yeah, sure.
There we go.
So I got all my kids on their Zooms too. So this is peak time for that. Anyway, just mentioning, we'll share the concept board results with everybody as a record of this session. And we welcome sort of doing that again if we have the opportunity to work closely with the team to move some of these concepts forward. And I want to thank everybody as well for their willingness to engage this format, which is not the easiest.
Drew, will it be possible to share the links for the recordings as well? Those things we can provide shortly. The locked concept board and the Zoom links can go out pretty quickly, right?
Right, yeah.
Great, thank you.
So we'll leave you with, yes, that's a hammer.
Nice.
There's a great not-for-profit here in Dallas called Better Block. That's they call themselves what is it, Philip? They're new urbanist activists.
I would call them.
They're the people that will go and they'll paint your traffic calming.
The tactical urbanists, yeah. Yeah,
and they're we were working with them on a site here in Dallas, and this is how they make their, they make a lot of their, like, you want to see what park benches would look like, or chairs and tables for Sidewalk Cafe. They make them on a CNC machine, And so they made me this hammer. That's how they put them together. And I keep this on my desk just because I love the work they do, but I didn't think about my sledgehammer math, and I actually have one. So
Nice.
I'll try to get a smaller hammer for the next round. And how about that? All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Talk to you
Good.
later.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.